Okay, so the second form of Jean Piaget's stage of cognitive development is the pre-operational stage, and this occurs between ages 2 to 6. So during this stage, the child has now learned object permanence, and this in turn leads to the child being able to understand symbols, and then this leads to really the most important cognitive stage, and that's the development of language. So during this stage, you see a major development in terms of the child's language. However, the child is still unable to do two very important things, and that is related to mental operations and concrete logic problems, right? So they lack the ability to understand conservation, the law of conservation. So when it comes to volume and mass, they don't get that. So in this example, you see this picture of this little girl, and in this image, she's pointing to the tall glass because she thinks that the tall glass has more fluid, right, more liquid in it than the glass below it, right next to it. So originally, the other glass next to that, the other wide glass that's the same glass as the one next to it, had the exact amount of liquid, and the child said that the two were the same. But then when the experimenter took the other wide glass and poured it into the tall glass, and she watched her do this, she said, oh, well, that one's the tallest. That one has more now. The tall one has more now. So clearly, at this stage, the child is unable to understand the law of conservation. And if you took another experiment you could do with a child is you could take 2 jars of Play-Doh, and they're the exact same amount. Take one of those right in front of the child, roll one of them out into a snake, and the other one can just be its original shape, or like a ball of Play-Doh, and the child will say that one's more. That one has more, right? So again, the child doesn't understand the concept of mass. That one doesn't weigh more. It's the exact same amount as the other Play-Doh. But because of the shape, the child thinks that it is more. So key milestone when they exit this stage would be the ability to understand conservation. They're also very egocentric, and another thing is theory of mind, which we're going to talk about those, and pretend play. This is kind of when you see kids dressing up in as ballerinas or princesses or pilots, or superheroes. They have this great imagination where they can pretend. So next we have egocentrism. And this is a key milestone that we notice in the pre-operational stage of development. And so basically here, it's just the child's inability to see anything from anyone else's point of view. So the children assumes that you see, that you hear, and that you smell exactly what they do. All right. As you can see here, and this was in your book, but this example, the child's conversation through this egocentric lens, you ask him, do you have a brother? Yes. What's his name? Jim. And does Jim have a brother? The child says no. Okay. This is a clear example of egocentrism, right? The child's not able to see from his brother's perspective, from Jim's perspective. He can only see it from his own perspective. So a clear experiment done during Piaget's research on this theory of cognitive development is related to this one right here, and I'm going to link a video that will show this experiment later. But basically, the child sits at the table. He's presented there are 3 small mountains in front of him, one with a snow top cap, one that's more of a hut, and one with a red cross on top on the opposite side. and the child is allowed to walk to both of these sides and see both sides of the table, and then he is to verbally report what he sees from his side and then what the clown would see from his side. And because the child is not able to report anything from the doll's side of the table, the doll's view of the table, it shows clearly that the child is still egocentric and can only see from his point of view, right? So that's egocentrism. Next, you have theory of mind. So although children are very much egocentric in this stage, one thing Piaget did notice is that they do have still this this ability to form a sense of theory of mind, and this is what helps us read people's intentions, right? What people will do, how people will behave. And research shows that this is actually seen as early as 7 months of age. And so obviously theory of mind develops more and more and more, and we're able to understand people's intentions as we age. But this experiment here, you look at Sally and Anne, right? So this is just a picture that he would walk his participants through. So Sally and Anne, Sally puts her ball in the red cupboard, right? Sally goes away. Anne moves the ball to the cupboard. And then when Sally looks for the ball, where will she look? And you ask the child that. And if the child says she'll look in the red one, then that child is clearly showing they are able to understand and read the other person's intentions, right? This develops more so from the age about 4 to 5. You see theory of mind starting to take place more than 3 years old or 2 years old. And so an example of that too was the Band-Aid box. It's also in your book, but you take a Band-Aid box and you ask the child, what's in the box? What do you think's in this box? And of course the child's gonna say Band-Aids, right? Well, there's pencils in the box, and you show the child, oh, there's pencils in the box, okay? And then you ask the child, hey, if we ask your friend Jim, who hasn't seen this Band-Aid box, what's going to be in the box? What do you think he'll say? So a typical 3-year-old would say pencils, right? They're going to lack that ability to understand theory of mind. But 4 to 5-year-olds tend to respond with Band-Aids. They're going to say Band-Aids are in the box because that's what I thought was in the box. So they'll probably think that too. So theory of mind just helps us read people's intentions. Okay, next we have concrete operational stage. This occurs from 7 to 11 years old, and it helps us grasp now the ability to understand these more complex mathematical understandings of conservation, right? So, when you mentally see someone pour liquids, you visually see someone pour liquids back and forth between glasses, you're able to understand that those liquids are being conserved, and it's not the shape that changes the amount of liquid, right? So children in this stage are also able to transform simple mathematical equations very quickly and easily. So if you ask a child, what's 4 plus 8? It's 12, right? And then if you then quickly ask them the same, take the same numbers and you say, what's 12 minus 4? The child's instantly able to respond with the answer 8, okay? If the child was in pre-operational stage, they would need a minute to rethink that and to count that out in their head. So concrete and operational thinking only really differs in the fact that concrete operational thinkers can understand these concepts and pre-operational cannot. So in terms of conservation, you see a major difference. And then also, obviously, those children who are in the concrete operational stage are going to be less egocentric than those in the pre-operational. Not a lot of differences here, but you do see the ability to understand mathematical principles more so. Last stage is formal operational. This occurs from around age 12, in which our reasoning and ability expands from concrete to abstract thinking. All right, at this point, we can now use symbols and imagined realities to systematic reasoning. So, a typical question that Piaget asked for experimenting with his participants in this stage is hypothetical questions, and using deductive reasoning questions to see their understanding. So a simple example of that was, if you could put an eye anywhere on your body, if you could have a third eye, where would you put that eye, and why would you put it there? Right, it's a hypothetical question. 7-year-old, really gonna think about it, and they'll answer and respond, "Oh, put it on my head. Right, I'll look like an alien. It'd be kind of cool. I'll have a third eye right here." However, you ask someone who's a little bit more older, and they put a little more thought to that, right? So someone who's 15-year-old might say, "I'll put that on my hand, right? So I can look around the corner to see if the environment's safe, right?" So it's a more inventive answer than, "Oh, on my forehead." Okay, so hypothetical questions, right? And another task that he did was the pendulum task, and this kind of explained that those who are in this formal concrete stage can think more scientifically than and more abstractly than those that are in the concrete stage. So formal operational stage, you can think more scientifically and use that scientific method to solve a problem. So when you take this pendulum task, it involved a length of a string and a set of weights. And so basically they had to consider 3 specific factors. The first was the length of the string. The second was the heaviness, the weight of the pendulum. And then the third was the strength of the push. And you would measure this by swings per minute. Okay, those in the concrete operational stage had a very difficult time with the experimental method. They just kind of did things randomly and tried changing 2 variables at once, whereas those in the formal operational stage thought more logically and more abstractly and changed one thing at a time, which is what you typically do in the scientific method. You don't change all the variables at once. You do one thing at a time so that you can see in sequences, like, what's actually happening here if we change this variable. So in terms of modifying the hypothesis, those in the formal operational stage were much more successful. This is a video here of Jean Piaget's cognitive development. I recommend you watch it. I'm going to post it on PSL and on the daily schedule calendar that has all our activities. But it's really important that you see these stages actually played out with children. So go ahead and watch that on your own time. Okay, this is our last slide for today. And now we are going to just kind of reflect on Piaget's theory. So Piaget's stage theory has been very influential globally, and it's validated a number of ideas regarding growth and human development through different cultures and societies across the world. But it's definitely not a perfect theory, and these are some of the key criticisms that come about. There are actually more out there if you want to look into those. But the first is that development is a continuous process. So it's clear that children develop these abilities at earlier stages than Piaget necessarily explained in his clear-cut discontinuity stages approach, right? So children do express their mental abilities and operations at earlier ages. And some of the criticisms that go inside of these is that Piaget maybe focused a little bit too much on language skills, some say, and so therefore obviously language skills develop as we age, and these may not be the best way to measure a child's logic or skill of understanding The second one is that he only did his testing within a certain region of the world. So his population group was mostly that, and which was in Geneva, and they had Western schooling. So you know, that could have had a play on it. And Lev Vygotsky and his theory of zone proximal development focused also on the social environment, whereas Piaget focused more on the physical environment. So a lot of these things could have to do with these two criticisms about the continuous process. And then lastly, formal logic is a smaller part of cognition than Piaget recognized it. So formal logic, how he measured formal logic, was strictly based on mathematics and scientific methods. But the reality is that there's many other fields that don't really use this form of logic on a day-to-day basis. And so to say that someone's cognitively immature because of their mathematical or their scientific method experience with solving problems and finding out the measurements of a pendulum swings per minute, that's not the best way to say that somebody's cognitively immature. And so they're saying, we also need to look at the fact of arts. What does it mean to be cognitively mature in the area of arts, and in the area of music, and in the area of history, right, and in the area of social understanding? There are different ways that we should measure cognitive maturity. Lastly, I want you to go ahead and answer these questions on your Lecture 1 response assignment. Okay. For the first question, I want you to give me 2 examples, and for the second question, I want you to go ahead and give me 2 examples. So again, you'll just copy and paste that question in there so that I know what you're referencing in your assignment. So please label things so I know what is what. All right. Okay, that's it for today for Lecture 1, and I will be posting another lecture again soon. All right. See you guys.